each other. Okay, so take a minute and set your page up so you can take notes. Remember, you guys online, you can pause this whenever you need to. So set your paper up. And this is Unit 11, so it's the next to the last unit. We're talking about DNA and protein synthesis. So Unit 11, DNA and protein synthesis. I'm just going to abbreviate synthesis, S-I-N. 331, and what class period is this? 7? Okay, so your guys are going to need your spiral, and then you'll also need your packet, so we can refer to that packet, and I can ask you to look at things in here. So the TEK for this, B6A, is what we're looking at, and it's kind of long. It says that you're going to identify components of DNA, identify how information for specifying the traits of an organism is carried in the DNA, and you're going to examine the scientific explanations for the origin of DNA. So we can't hit all three of those at one time, so I'm going to kind of shrink it down just a little bit. So you're going to identify, okay, identify components of DNA. What's that word components mean? Anybody? Parts? Yeah? You're going to identify the parts. Didn't we just talk about that, the parts of DNA? Okay, so identify the components of DNA. Identify how the information for traits of an organism is carried on the DNA. How info for the traits are carried in the DNA. So I kind of abbreviated a lot of that stuff. I'm going to ... We're going to get the other stuff there in just a minute. So we're going to focus on these two parts right in here, and that's enough. That's quite a bit, as a matter of fact. So what are the components of DNA? So I'm going to do this in two sections here. Was it one of you guys in here that asked me to put titles on these notes? So it made it a little bit easier. So we're going to put up here DNA, make it big, this is your title, DNA parts. Here's your title. And then pages 2 and 3, or 2 and 4 in your packet have some pictures we're going to cut and paste and stick them in your notes because someone else asked me for visuals that go with that. So we're going to put some of those in there too. So it's probably something I'll work on for next year, but it'll be just this unit and the next one that I'll have some pictures for you guys to put in just to kind of go along with the notes, so it kind of has, hey, here's a picture of what I'm talking about here. So let's start off with the components of DNA. And I'm going to use that word a lot because a lot of people are unfamiliar. Components of DNA. What does DNA stand for? Okay, that's pretty good. Deoxy, ribo, nucleic, that's all one word, and then acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid. And remember RNA, if I cover up the deoxy, there's RNA, ribonucleic acid. Yeah? Okay. So they're going to ask you some information. Even though it's not in the TEKs, they still put this information on the STAR test. So I'm going to bring this in, and plus it's just the coolest stuff ever. You can't pick up a science book, a biology book, without talking about these guys in here. So this structure of DNA and how it basically worked was discovered by a couple of people. So the components of DNA and how it works was discovered by two main guys. There were some more people that added to it, but two main guys, Watson and Crick. One of these guys is dead now. I can't remember which one it is. I think Watson's still alive. You guys might Google it and see. James Watson and Francis Crick, big names, and they're like rock stars in biology. They can, okay, they're just amazing here, guys. I'm going to put and ... Franklin here. So, and I'll explain why I'm going to put her to the side here. So Watson and Crick, they're the ones that won the Nobel Prize. So when you do something amazing in science or in a lot of different phases. You get this. You have the opportunity to get the Nobel Prize. It's not like you put your name in the hat and say, "Oh, please, I want to be up for this one." But a body of scientists or a group of people choose who gets the Nobel Prizes. There's one in math. There's one in biology. There's one in lots of different things. Histories are in that. So these two guys won the Nobel Prize in biology. And usually when you say Nobel Prize, if you're a Nobel Prize winner, it's like, holy crap, that's amazing. You're going to be in the books forever for this one. They also give you lots of money that's associated with it. So these guys, they get money thrown at them, like $1 million. Yeah. So they did this. The reason Franklin didn't get it is because by the time these guys won the prize, she died early. She died pretty young of cancer. So they don't give the Nobel Prize to people who are already dead. So these two are the ones that got this on there. So these guys, they're just big names. Kind of like, when we talk about physics, we bring up the name Einstein, right? When we talk about biology, these are the names, Watson and Crick, that we bring up. They're the ones who figured out that structure for the DNA. So they are the ones that said, hey, it's a double helix. A double helix. It's not okay. It's not enough anymore for you guys to say it's shaped like a twisted ladder. So I'm going to put that twisted ladder in there. You need to know that it's called a double helix. It's not a perfectly twisted ladder. It's got a kind of a weird shape to it, but that gives us a mental image of what it's going to be like. So that's a good model for us to kind of look at and say, okay, this is kind of like what it is here. So the sides of the ladder, so I'm going to put some boxes in here. Sides of the ladder are made of alternating sugar and phosphate. Sides of ladder made of sugar and phosphate. Okay, so the name of the sugar is deoxyribose. That's where it gets its name. Anytime you see OSE on the end of a chemical name, it refers to the fact that it's going to be a sugar. The phosphate, I'm going to show you what it looks like. You don't have to memorize that, but if they pop that up on the test, I don't want you to freak out and say, I've never seen that before. So a phosphate is a polyatomic ion that tends to stay, a group of atoms that tend to stay together in a chemical reaction as chunks. So this phosphate ion is PO4 with a -3 charge. So that's the sugar and the phosphate. And they alternate sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, and so on. So that's the sides of the ladder. The steps of the ladder, or the rungs, and I'm going to call them rungs. You need to know that word. Rungs or steps. So I'm going to put steps in parentheses here. The rungs of the ladder are made of nitrogenous bases. Nitrogenous bases. Okay. Grab a different color, grab a pencil, a pen, do something different. I'm going to put a box around these guys right here, kind of a funny box here, because this together, these three pieces, the sugar, the phosphate, the nitrogenous base, remember that's the monomer. Monomer of the DNA and the RNA, to be honest. And remember, that's called a nucleotide. They're going to refer to them as nucleotides, the nucleotides of the nucleic acid. It's made of 3 parts, the sugar, the phosphate, and the nitrogenous base, one of those. That's a nucleotide. That's a monomer of DNA. So do you remember the letters, the 4 letters for DNA? What are the nitrogenous base letters? Yep. Okay, so we have A, T, C, and G. A stands for adenine. T is thymine. C is cytosine. I don't think they'll have you memorize the words for them. They'll refer to them, but really, if you know the first letters of these, then you're okay. G is guanine. Here's what you need to know. A always hooks up with T. It's its mate. It's its complement. its other half, if you want to say it that way. C always bonds to H. So the rounded letters hook up together and the straight letters hook up together. So that's the most important thing. You need to know that these two always hook up together, these two always hook up together. If an A accidentally hooks up with a C, that's where you have a mutation, because it's going to change things. It's going to change how the protein is made. All right, the next thing in here is that, again, you need to understand that the only reason the DNA is important is because it has all the instructions for making the proteins that control your body. Remember we talked about proteins? Basically all your body's made of proteins, all the enzymes, many of the hormones are made of proteins and fats together, so proteins everywhere, right? So the DNA controls all the activities. Because, and only because, it has the instructions for making the proteins. That's what makes the DNA so important. It's got the instructions for making everything. If you mess up those instructions, that's where we talk about mutations are happening. So we don't mess up the instructions at all. Okay, so the DNA controls all of the cell's activities because it has the instructions for making all the proteins. That's what it's so important for. And remember, the proteins are doing everything in your body. They're doing everything there is to know. So we talked about here the components. Let's focus in a little bit more on the second part. How is that information for all your traits carried on the DNA? So next big circle here. How the info, the information for traits So you see the DNA, you see the structure, the H, G, C's, and T's, the sugar and the phosphate. How exactly does that have the instructions for making a protein? Okay, and when we say making a protein, I don't even say the word protein's not in here at all. It's this word traits. So I'm going to put traits. Do you guys know what that word traits is? If I said describe your traits, you could do that, right? You know, a lot of times we just describe our physical characteristics. So characteristics is a good way to think of traits. Many times we just focus on we do the obvious, like what do we look like on the outside, but your characteristics are things like, can you roll your tongue? Do you remember doing that when you're studying genetics and doing Punnett squares? Can you roll your tongue? Yeah? No? Yeah. Characteristics could be things like, how much does your brain weigh? Well, we don't usually describe ourselves. I have a very heavy brain. Yeah, I know. Have you guys seen those CSI shows where they do autopsies and they take organs out and they put them in the scales and weigh them and stuff? They really do that. Those are characteristics too. We just kind of focus on the outside and say, oh, well, I have brown hair, I have blue eyes, I have freckles, I don't have freckles, things like that. So we do that type of thing. But in reality, everything is a trait. How long is your nose? That's a trait or characteristics. That is controlled by the DNA. How many freckles do you have on your left cheek? Yeah? Do you have a mole? Do you have a mole anywhere? Those are all characteristics or traits, yeah? So, is your index finger the same size as your ring fingers? It's just as tall. You remember doing the little thumb? Does your thumb curve backwards? Those are all traits. Some of them are pretty insignificant, like, so what if? Some people's thumb, my husband's thumb is straight, and mine curves back like this. Yes, like really? It doesn't really do anything for us one way or the other, but that's a trait or a characteristic. All those things are how big is your ear? All those things are characteristics or traits. So exactly how are these traits carried, this information to make these traits carried in the DNA? So here's the deal. It's the order of those nitrogenous bases. So the order of the nitrogenous bases, or the sequence, I'm going to use the word sequence here. The sequence determines what protein is made. Okay, do you guys know what the word sequence is? It's the same way as saying the order sequence. You can say 1, 2, 3, 4, or alphabetic sequence. Yes? Something in order. So when we talk about that, what we're saying is it's the sequence of letters. That one on one side goes C-A, is it G on the bottom? C-A-G. That's the sequence of the letters. It's like a code. You might have a code that's got 100 letters in it. And every 3 letters stands for an amino acid. The next 3 letters is a different amino acid. The next 3 letters is another amino acid and another. So every 3 letters says, hey, stick that amino acid right there. And the next 3 says, put the next one, put this amino acid in the next spot. And the next 3 letters says, put this amino acid in the 3rd spot. So it puts the amino acids in a certain order. And the order that the amino acids are in determines what protein it is. What are proteins made of? Amino acids, right? And there are only 20 of them that we use in the body, in the organism. So it's the order of those amino acids that determines what protein it is. And who has the instructions for putting the order of the amino acids in order? It's right here. It's the C's, A's, G's, and T's. It's how are they arranged in the DNA. So it's this sequence here. If you change the order, you change what protein you're making. If you change the order of the bases, I didn't want to write out the word nitrogenous, so I put the N bases. If you change the order of the nitrogenous bases, you change what protein you're making. You change the protein. Okay, grab a marker, some other colored pencil, something, circle this. This is a key. Multiple questions, multiple star questions were, how is the information carried on the DNA? Well, it's the order of the nitrogenous bases. That's how it's carried. It's a secret code. Every 3 letters stands for 1 amino acid. Okay. I'm going to underline this word protein one more time. What good are proteins in your body? Yeah, they pretty much make up all your body parts. They're enzymes, some hormones, all sorts of crazy stuff are in there. So all of these things are important. They're made of those proteins. The last thing I'm going to have you write down is it's called a central dogma of biology. Dogma means like this basic premise that everything is built on. This is one of those things that if you decide to go into biology, it's one of those things that it's like everything goes from there. 1 gene, 1 protein. So you have 1 gene and 1 protein. So what does that mean? So write this down. 1 gene makes 1 protein. If you need a different protein, you have to use a different gene. This is that central dogma, that basic tenet of biology. So what do I mean by gene? Because that's the first word I've thrown in here that's not anywhere in our notes so far. So a gene is a section of DNA that has the instructions to make one protein. I'm going to put that in a different color. A gene is a section, a piece of DNA that has the instructions to make one protein. So when we talk about our genes, do you remember way back in 7th grade or 8th grade when you did Punnett squares? When we do Punnett squares in genetics, we really do the simple stuff. We don't get too complex, like eye color. You know, oh, you have two genes for every trait, right? So at least 2 genes for every trait. So you have a gene from your mom that says brown eyes and a gene from your dad that says blue eyes. Well, that doesn't mean you're going to have one brown eye and one blue eye. It means one color, one gene is going to be dominant over the other. Yeah? So if you have brown and blue, we've found over time that the brown is dominant over the blue, so the person shows up with brown eyes. Now, however, are all brown eyes the same shade of brown? No. So you realize there's more than just one set of genes. There could be several sets of genes that code for brown eye color, and they all work together to get that certain shade of brown that you have, right? But we don't talk about it being multiple genes there because that makes it more complex. What we do is we say, let's do something really simple so we understand just the general idea of what's going on and how genes are transferred and how you have red hair or brown hair or blue eyes or brown eyes or whatever. How do you get those traits on there? So when we talk about genes, we're talking about a piece of that DNA that has the instructions to make one protein. Now, don't remember talking about chromosomes, and you have 2 of the number 1 chromosomes and 2 of the number 2 chromosomes and 2 of the number 3 chromosomes, right? Remember talking about that? One of those genes for eye color is on the number 1 chromosome you got from your mom. The other one is on the number 1 chromosome you got from your dad. So you're getting 2 different genes from 2 different people, and that's what goes together to make you. So when we talk about that overall, and that'll be our next unit, the last unit we do when we talk about genetics, but when we talk about just in general what a gene is, they used the word gene before they even discovered DNA. They came up with that word before they discovered DNA. They didn't even quite know what it was. They were just saying, hey, there's this thing that you get one from your mom and one from your dad, and it goes to making you, and they always come in pairs like that. So now we know more information. We can say, hey, this gene is actually a little section of DNA. It could be 10,000 letters long. It could be 100,000 letters long. But it's a series of letters, and what it does is it makes the protein. And since proteins are really huge Godzilla molecules, it's going to take a lot of letters to make that stuff. Okay? Now, what I'd like you to do is flip to page 3 in your packet. Don't put your notes away, because you're going to cut out some pictures, and we're going to paste them into your notes. So those of you who wanted some visuals to go along with it, it'll make more sense.
Miss Howard, do you ever snort oxygen?
Do I snort
Oxygen.
pure oxygen, or am I just breathing?